Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoy your night yesterday. So we are off again for half a day of presentation before lunch and then the General Assembly of EDRLab. We will start now with the production and remediation roundtable, presenting different creative tools made by great talented developers and with always accessibility in mind, as it must be. So we will start now with Tröger presenting us Bookalope, and then we will see Florent, Dilien, and Pedro Milliet presenting their different projects. So please welcome them.
Thanks. Thanks, Marie. Can you hear me? Okay. So I have a bunch of slides and a demo, but I think I might have to erase a little bit because we got only 15 minutes. A little bit about Bookalope. I started Bookalope more than 10 years ago and have been developing it ever since. And ultimately, the goal really is to turn any input document into a semantically structured and accessible output document. I'll talk about that in a moment, a little bit in more detail. You can use the Bookalope tools. It's a tool chain running on a standard server somewhere in the cloud. You can use the tools through the website, which is usually the most convenient way to interact. There is a REST API if you feel inclined in building your own tools against the backend. One of the tools that talks directly through the REST API is an InDesign plugin that we've built in collaboration with folks from Lian. And as of last year, Bookalope is the only publishing tool that's been certified by Benetech to produce accessible ebooks, which means that if you export an ebook with Bookalope and you fix all the warnings, there's a really good chance that you can pass Benetech certification just on a fast track. And so that's up and running as of last year. So the way Bookalope works is in 3 stages. The first one is you're importing a document. And that document can be a Word document, which is the most common format, because that's how people write books. Bookalope can import EPUB files, both EPUB 2 and EPUB 3. And interestingly, we have put a lot of effort into compensating for broken EPUBs. And we've come across some really interesting cases. So when I talk about remediation using Bookalope, creating books or producing ebooks versus remediating ebooks, there's no difference as far as Bookalope is concerned. You just upload a document. If that's a broken ebook, that's just as fine as a Word document. It's the same thing. There is a plugin for Bookalope, so you can push InDesign documents to the server to work with it. And Bookalope just ingests everything and separates the design from the content of the document. And that's actually a step that publishers seem to struggle with, to disconnect content, structured content, from how content is eventually being presented on screen in an EPUB reader, on a website, on PDF. So there's a strict separation between the two. And that separation is implemented by structure classification. So there's a bit of, to use buzzwords, there's an AI running, which basically labels the structure of the document, and then the next step is a document review. That step is optional. I usually recommend to go through that review because the labeling, the structuring of the document can be a little bit off depending on the initial design of the document. So if the design is messy, the labeling will be a bit off. And we know that all from our own experience. You know, you receive a Word document or some other book and you look at the structures, I can't tell what they're trying to do here. The AI gets confused in the exact same way, so there's always a manual step of reviewing and adjusting labels, adding additional metadata to the book, if you so choose, and that's it. And you can do, we'll go through it in a moment. And then finally, you export the document, and that's really it. Exporting as well in EPUB. That EPUB format will guaranteed pass EPUB check and ACE. If you fixed all the warnings, hopefully it'll also pass the Benetech certification. You can export PDF. The PDF is also accessible as far as PDF can be made accessible. There's an InDesign export, and so we're actually working with Ken from Circular Software to really improve and integrate that into these workflows. All the checks, all the validation, everything is taken care of, right? And so to talk a little bit about buzzwords, so in a sense, a workflow with Bookalope really is a born accessible workflow. It is a digital first workflow. It's a single source workflow, so you probably recognize all these, publishing buzzwords, and all of them are kind of consolidated into, that's how Bookalope just works, and has worked for a long time. Interestingly, adoption is really slow, and from my own experience, ebook production for publishers still seems to be a bit foreign to the industry, and I think that's mainly because ebook production adds to the traditional print workflows, or it deviates from it. So traditionally, for the last, 500 years, there was a linear workflow. We printed books, and that's it. And then suddenly ebooks came around, and things started to crumble, and they're being tacked on, and workflows are being munched around. And so things got a little bit messy. The other problem I found with publishers often is that they require, for ebook production, they require in-house technical expertise. And that seems to be established now that this has to be there. Somehow we're expecting publishers who build ebooks to know about the standards and all the nitty-gritty of EPUB. I would argue that's not necessary. Which brings me to the next slide, and that's the importance of trust. As I mentioned earlier, Bookalope has been certified last year by Benetech, and that certification actually establishes a degree of trust, and trust in my workflow as a publisher matters. Because if the workflow guarantees a certain quality and standards compliance, then as a publisher, if I have that EPUB, I don't need to spend time checking it, testing it, breaking it open, make sure all the HTML tags are correct. All that becomes superfluous. Like I don't have to do that anymore, because I can trust that my workflow and the tools do the job for me. And it's very similar to exporting an a PDF file, right? We export a PDF. Who of us opens that PDF and starts checking that that PDF meets the PDF standards? We don't do that. We just trust that the export works, and EPUB should work on the same level. The other advantage of trusting my tools is that the tool assumes the responsibility of maintaining the standards. So as a publisher, there's no need for you to understand CSS, HTML, and all the other standards that kind of munch together into an EPUB, because the tool does that for you. And for us as software engineers who build these tools, it's our responsibility to make sure the tools adhere to the standards, so you don't have to bother with it, right? And so, last slide, I want to talk a little bit about automation, because it's becoming a deal with the European Accessibility Act, with backlogs that publishers have. Backlog remediation and automation are two very interesting terms. And my response usually to that is, yes, it can be done, but not really. And it really depends on what remediation we're talking about. Are we talking about structural remediation, meaning here's an EPUB 2 file, let's just update it to EPUB 3, right? There's a bunch of metadata that needs to change, but we're not going to touch the content. That sort of structural remediation can be automated. We can run that on tens of thousands of books, and it'll just work. Content remediation becomes a little bit more difficult, because now we're starting to look at the actual internal markup of the book. How has that been produced, and do we need to adjust that? And that's where things become a little bit more involved. And again, that's where the classification, the AI in Bookalope, helps us a long ways. But there will always be a little bit of a manual adjustment to make sure that the labels are actually correct. And then there is the question of, do we add accessibility? Like, suppose you have an EPUB 2 that's pretty broken. It has no accessibility information built into it. The HTML markup is really crap. So structural remediation, yes, we can do. Content remediation, yes, we can do that almost automatically. But adding accessibility into it, that'll take a little bit of effort. So we have these 3 points, and then we need to combine those with the complexity of the ebook itself. So if it's just a novel, a text novel, It's pretty easy to deal with it. If the text gets a little bit more complex, like add footnotes, images, captions, tables, things become a little bit more tricky, right? And then old ebooks had very creative ways of expressing, for example, footnotes. Right? Can we bring that forward? Can we automate that kind of markup? And we've put a lot of effort into kind of dealing with this kind of nonsense. And then there's the complex content. And I'm talking about indexes, glossaries, asides, like in academic ebooks. When we look at academic ebooks, they can be very colorful. They can be, like you look at a page and there's a bunch of stuff scattered around the page. Linearizing that for EPUB, for reflowable EPUB, and then making it accessible and structuring can be really, really difficult. And I don't think that can be automated at all. And so one last comment before I start on the demo. Just because an ebook passes EPUB check and passes ACE doesn't make it accessible. It doesn't make it a useful ebook, right? And so there's actually, with Bookalope, you can run completely automated workflows. Ignore that review step. All the ebooks that come out in the end, they will pass all these tests. You pop them open, you think, ooh, that looks pretty ugly. It was ugly before, it's still ugly. But it passes the tests now, right? So there will always be a step of manual review to make sure that an ebook becomes accessible if it hasn't before, that it becomes well structured if it hasn't before, right? And with that, let's take a look at how this works. So I took a random, okay, I got five minutes, I think. So this is random EPUB I downloaded from Project Gutenberg. And I'll restart the workflow, which basically means that's exactly the same as an upload. Just to give you a sense of the time involved here. And so what happens now is it takes the EPUB, breaks it open, pulls in all the content, all the CSS, all the formatting, and then basically it extracts all the text, it extracts all the formatting, the visual presentation of the text, and it uses that information to kind of derive what is a chapter, what's a section, what is this, what is that. And now we're in that review step, and at the bottom of the review step is a confirm and finish, so we could literally skip ahead and just trust that the AI did an okay job, which it didn't, as we will see in a moment. So let me turn off the spell checking because it's a bit in the way. So all these orange blobs, those were spell checking, and those were punctuation checks, language checks, all sorts of things you can do with Bookalope. We're not interested in. So one of the really interesting things is, as I talked a moment ago, there's a separation between the content and the presentation of the content. So what you're seeing here is the structured content in a first iteration, using the original styling of the ebook, of the document. However, that has already been dismissed. We do not carry that styling forward because we're not interested in it. When we're remediating books, because we're changing the structure, the original styling isn't working anymore. So Bookalope actually has a whole bunch of custom styles you can then apply on export. For convenience, we're just using the styles here so the user kind of can orient himself in it. There's this little feature down here in the bottom preview where we can turn off the styling, and that is a presentation of the original, of the actual structure. And I like to kind of go forth and back between it to make sure that all the styling, all the structure has been labeled correctly. And so one important rule of the game with Bookalope is that a chapter title starts a new page. If you want to start a new page, open a new chapter. And that's just how it works, right? And so looking at that EPUB, my first question would be, okay, well, this seems to be like before the title, it's just an image, right? So we're not quite sure what that page is supposed to be. It's labeled as a paragraph. Okay, let's just make that a title, a chapter, and then in the chapter, we can just say, okay, that's my half title page. So when I open the book for print, for EPUB, the first thing I want to see in the half title page is that image. I suppose that's what it is meant by this, and I don't want to have this particular chapter in the table of content. And then there's already the next problem here is this paragraph down here, right? And the paragraph is kind of sitting under the image, and so as a human, I kind of can assume that's supposed to be a caption. And that's where the UI becomes really quite powerful, because now I can option click all these paragraphs. And as you can see, it says at the bottom, selected 11 elements. And so let's look at these 11 elements. And these 11 elements all look the same. So that means they're all captions. And so what I can do now is I just change any one of them to a caption. It cascades through the book. And then if I go back to it, or this has been labeled as a caption. And so you work your way through the book to adjust the labels. This image we can completely ignore because it's just the title page, but the title page follows as well, right? So that's a chapter. Interestingly, they decided to implement the table of content as a table. We're not interested in that table at all. What we're interested in is to make this a chapter title, oops, and then basically say that chapter title is my table of content. And by doing that, you tell Bookalope, I want to put a table of content here. And that table of content is derived from the structure of the book. So I don't care about the table of content that the book ships with, because it's going to build its own anyway. Same here, table of illustrations. And then same thing here. You can see that there is the first thing on first man on the moon. I'll just ignore that for now. And then I cascade select all these headings. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so that is a caption. And then I cascade select through the book, all fine. Where's the next section? Here it is. 29 elements, and I cascade them into chapters. And that's really all you have to do. And most of the time, the AI gets these labels right. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on how messy the document was in the first place. And you work your way through the book, and you confirm and finish, and that's it. And so depending on how much effort you would like to make, or one thing that maybe is interesting, we can go back. So you can actually go forth and back here as much as you want. One interesting thing you might have noticed, it pops up these little labels up there, strong, author, strong. That basically indicates that this particular piece of text, which is bold, is identified as meaning a strong emphasis, right? If you want to change that, you just click on it and then you select, oh, that's actually just an emphasis, right? So you make it an emphasis or you just remove it altogether, and Bookalope will do the rest. It has a full content editing in here. You can select text, you can do stuff with text, you can enter, like edit the document if need be. And I think I need to finish. And so basically, to jump forward, so you work through the book, you review the content, everything is done, and that pretty much concludes the remediation of that ebook. And if you now export that ebook, you have a bunch of styles you can choose from. There are notes, if there are notes in the ebook that have been originally footnotes or endnotes, Bookalope doesn't care. These are just notes on the text. These notes you can export as footnotes or as text, as endnotes. And Bookalope will just they have a lifting for you and make sure that all the markup is correct and everything. You can export for print. Again, that's a whole bunch of different styles if you want to use them. You can export to InDesign. We have a bunch of InDesign templates. If you have your own templates, you can use them. We'll place the InDesign files into those. And for those folks who do have XML-related workflows already, they can export HTML book, doc book, TEI. We have a bunch of prototypes for other XML import and export. So you can just basically do whatever you want, and it should just integrate. Yeah, with that, back to the slides, and I think I'm pretty much done. So that QR code, if you're curious, that's a blog we published earlier last week about, like, where we really dive into this whole trust thing and then trusted workflows versus why are you outsourcing, why are you testing, why are you checking? Do you not trust your process? Do you not trust the result? Right, so there's a whole argument in that. And it takes you to our website as well if you want to follow that. We have a bunch of stuff on GitHub if you would like to contribute, especially our InDesign integration. That's all open source. Bunch of videos online, so enjoy yourself. Thanks.